So for this video, I want to narrate out what is for me about an hour of modeling. I think this video comes down to about 15 minutes because I sped it up 4 times speed. And I want to walk you through some of the tools I'm going to use and some of the ways in which I solve my problems in here. Last video, I showed you some of the techniques I used isolated, and I'll refer to them here. So if you want to know what I'm doing when I say like I'm doing a grid fill or that I'm creating a corner piece using an empty to like rotate it with the mirror, check out my last video. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Now, I actually just recorded this because usually I do a little extra modeling to demonstrate some steps here. That's a simple edge, a bevel, and then an inset with a little bit of offset on the inset, a little bit of depth to get that. I'm just trying to clean things up. I've taken my top window piece, brought it down, and stretched out a little bit. I'm trying to keep things on the grid as much as possible. I selected those top corner pieces to do my little edges, and I just used P to separate those into their own objects. So some techniques, and again, modeling stuff that I've shown you how to do before. Here I'm looking at my reference, and I'm just trying to do as close of a job I can of estimating the overall rough shape of what I have here. I like to work when I'm modeling just in symmetry as much as possible. I like to leave my modifiers on. And I like to leave this array on because I can see how it's affecting all the pieces at once. Here, I realized I didn't need the extra sides on this, and I wanted more space to sort of give this that taper that goes down into it. And then I'm looking for some of these cases, just filling in holes, looking for inside edges. Here I choose all the edges, and I say SY0 to flatten out in that axis, and then E, and I'm using a lot of vert snaps. If you look up at the top, you see that my snapping is set to vertices snapping, and anytime I hold control, I can just snap it to a vert. Again, deleting interior faces as I kind of go. So looking for any inside faces that I don't need, and just putting in enough edges. I use extrude and the loop cut tool, Control R, are probably the two most commonly used, along with Control B for bevel. Here I'm using the extrude manifold tool, which lets me extrude without having any inside faces in a case like that. Doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to delete the inside faces, but in that case, it works just fine. So same thing, just making sure I delete the inside faces. I don't have to be 100% accurate with the modeling here. I'm just trying to get so that if you see it at a glance, you get the idea. You don't always have to put every single feature in here. Now I'm trying to make these corner bits, which on this particular building are done by having double wide versions of the pillars. And so I started making it out SX-1 to flip it in the other direction. But this is where I realized it's not quite lining up enough because this is too wide. I went into X-ray mode so I can hit Control B and box select all of those verts. And then I duplicated it and applied both of my modifiers so that I can get 2 pillars, basically 1.5 pillars. Because I'm using the pillar as my halfway point to get to my next piece here. So just merging pieces together and trying to get them close enough. As I can see, they're really, really on top of each other. They have a lot less space. Control period to set my pivot or my origin point down to the corner. And now I'm using my snapping to line it straight up. And here, I'm trying to snap them together, but I realize they really should overlap. You'll often see as I'm modeling in here, I go back over a couple elements a few times because even though I know pretty much what I'm doing and I have a good sense of modeling, sometimes a certain approach doesn't work and I got to try another one. For instance, here's an example of I just couldn't get this cut to go down the way I wanted it to. I tried like 3 or 4 times. So instead, I just deleted most of these faces in the area, and now I had enough to sort of bridge, extrude up and snap, F to fill, and then I can just Control X to delete the extra face, and it gets me what I need. So I'm doing a lot of, you'll see I use a lot of extruding and then scaling with 0 to like flatten things out. Here I'm using grid fill, where I'm gonna just merge those 2 top pieces, and then I can type in grid fill using my search and just fill that one in. All clicking a hole will select the whole thing, so it's often pretty convenient to do that. I'm using a mirror and then this empty, and the empty can become the center for my mirror so that when I rotate it 45 degrees along the z-axis, it's going to turn the corner for me. And if I turn on bisect, it'll sort of clip. And I'm looking for now just getting things lined up and then fixing it on the main part of the model. So as you see, it's a lot of these pieces, and it really repeats these elements. So the buildings are like 2 meters or some case 3 meters tall. These little elements that are the cornices, I would call them, they're about 1/2 meter tall. And I try to stick to that grid measurement as much as possible because it means all the snapping works really well. It's just much easier to manage. So again here, I can set my snap to median, and then I get it right in the center. Again, 4x speed, and I'm a pretty fast modeler in general, so I know it's a little hard to catch exactly what I'm doing. But if you do have questions and you're like, hey, at such and such a time you did this thing, what was that? Go ahead and ask me, post in the Discord, and I'd be happy to direct you to more information. I just don't want to do a whole video where I take something that's like, would take me 4 hours to model if I narrate it step by step. Again, for me, this took about an hour, and I anticipate that anything takes me an hour to do will take you 4 times as long to do. So, and with narrating, that can take a long time. Now I know for this next piece, looking at my reference, I just need these little side-by-side blocks, and they're really tight together. So I'm trying to merge these verts by distance, and then just tucking them in. Again, B to do my box select. Everything is in X-ray mode, which is Alt or Option Z, and that makes it easy to line things up and select all the verts that I want. So just lining things up and making sure I'm closing up as many of the gaps as possible when looking at it from different angles. Getting rid of any extra faces on the interior that I don't need, so all of these. The nice thing about X-ray mode is any faces show up as little dots, and that makes it easier to see. So now I have this, I can use my mirror, use my same empty, and set up the same clipping, and it works great. I saw that I had my normals flipped. You can go to face orientation up in that viewport option, and it'll show blue is facing the correct direction, red is backwards. And so I just went into the object and I selected everything and hit Alt-N to reverse that and set it back to the normal direction. Now in the reference here, I noticed there were 2 slightly different windows, and I decided to model both of them, even though for the rest of this class, I'll probably stick with just one window type to simplify it, just because you got to create like a second edge piece. You got to create a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not always necessary to do every little detail in this, and I wanted to keep some of these things relatively simple, but I kept it in this video because I want to show you a different model case. So this case, I'm trying to use the knife tool again, and what I'm forgetting is to hit Z to actually let me cut through everything, and I remembered it here, and it finally worked. Even though I've been modeling for more than a decade, there's still lots of stuff I forget or I don't notice. Here's another case here of I'm trying to extrude it all out together, and it's just picking up too many edges and heading in too many directions. So I decided to undo it and just do it manually. And so I'm moving the pieces out by hand instead, because it's fine. At this point, it's going to give me the result that I want. I try to avoid doing things in this brute force technique if I can help it, but sometimes you can't help it. So I don't always have to model every little detail of every little surface, but just enough that gives me a good sense of this model. In fact, if you look at modeling in movies and games up close, it's a lot simpler than you think it is. And you'd be surprised how many cheats people really get away with their models. We just need the idea of something more than anything else. Okay, so now I'm just doing as many of the insets. I'm focusing on big shapes, and anything that I feel is like too difficult to model at this stage, I'm skipping if I don't think it's worth the time. But if it's a really big element, I might want to invest that extra time. But I'm still looking at big shapes. So here, putting a little extra edge in and just tucking it over, it helps. It gives me the sense of what's happening in this shape. So here I noticed that I don't need this little column to come all the way up. So I'm just clipping things in the center. I'm using a merge to last here. So whatever is white when I hit M is merge to last, and then I hit Shift R to repeat that function. Looking at this by itself, doing the same thing here. Whatever's white is my last thing, so when I do merge to last, it'll merge to that object. So it helps me decide between 2 verts which one goes where. So everything being on the grid really helps. Clipping all of this off, because for this piece, there aren't those little metapies, or triglyphs, I should say. There aren't those little triglyph pieces coming out. I just need a straight kind of cornice all coming out. So the nice thing about the cornices and doing the little corner trick that I'm doing is it helps me figure out how far out something needs to go. So I started shaping this one and I put it on the corner like so. And I recognize it needs to come out quite a bit farther than the other elements. This is going to be the start of my roof piece, of my crown to the building up here. And this is where I deleted it, and instead I alt duplicated, because now that they're instanced with the alt duplicate, I only have to move in part, and it gets the whole thing, and it will build the corner piece for me. Just don't forget to make it single user after you're done modeling. Otherwise, you'll run into like quite a bit of trouble trying to fix that later. So duplicating up the edges, the corners. Now, a mistake that I really made with this one that I end up fixing on my own, that's not in the video, is the location of my locator it's kind of like a 0.67. You want to keep everything in the meters or the 0.1 meters, like the decameters, so to speak, because it's going to snap to grid a lot better. So try to avoid like 0.25. Instead, you'd want 0.3 or 0.4 or 0.2 would be a lot better because it helps control better on the grid. So I use, as you can see, a ton of snapping. Most of the time, I'm just set up to purely be snapping to verts. So anytime I hold control, I can snap to any grid in here. Same deal with this, just one last little element pulling up into the roof. Same kind of bit I did here. I want to get it to line up as much as I possibly can with the windows, so there's like a real Lego block grid to what I'm doing. And then I'm looking for divisions, and so I'm kind of going half and then half and then half. I extrude out one piece at a time, and then I delete all these interior faces. And I won't really know how this top molding piece should look until I do my corner. And so I can do that double mirror kind of trick. And now I'm using this as a reference, and it can be my reference key to what should the shape be. Because most from my reference video, what I actually can tell is what it looks like from the side, not from the front, is hard to notice. So cleaning up a few of the bits here, lifting up more, and just trying to think about what's the easiest way of processing a lot of this. And of course, I'm not putting nearly as much detail as is actually into the building. I'm simplifying things, but that works okay, and it's easy and very flexible to work with. Last bit for me to model are some of these little bottoms. Now, I did decide I wanted to pull these down a little bit. Looks a little bit more accurate to the reference model, but since everything's instanced, it mostly matches up because I'm using Alt-A to duplicate everything. So now I'm going to take this bottom piece and I start by filling it in using clipping on my mirrors so it all comes to center. And then I can fill this hole in by choosing two opposites and F, the hole in F, and then I can select that edge and Control X to delete it. Select all these, P by selection, and so it gives me the individual piece, and now I can just work on, I got the window all made, and now I can build out this little door. I'm trying to get things lined up here as best I can. Building out the pediment there, and I recognize I don't need that, and this is where I recognize, oh, I've got it in here, but I'm trying to fix the array. I need to go back to the original. It's okay if there's a little overlap there. I'm just trying to clean up any of the gaps and make sure I don't see the model going through it. A little bit of overlapping is just fine. It's better for me to not have any empty gaps in it that are really visible. So this is the same kind of techniques I've been using this whole time. It's just a lot of extra edges. Now here I'm trying to do an inset and it's just not working for me. I haven't figured out why. So I'm trying to go through, look at it by itself in what's called local view. I can see there's a lot of extra verts in here. So I'm doing a lot of merging of verts and I still pull it out. I want to separate this and extrude it back by itself. It's still having trouble. And I look a little closer and I realize there are two verts on top of each other. So I just get those together. And as soon as I have, it's fine. I can delete these other bits. And now I have this inset cut that I need to be able to give me my window. Now I'm going into the bottom, trying to create a barrier for where my windows start, my window panels on the door start and end, and putting in a reference spot for that little inset at the bottom of the door. So I start out with an inset and I line them up using vert snapping, add a little extra subdivision there, and Control-Shift-B to bevel a vert to give me this shape. And then I just stretch it out along the Z-axis. So I scaled along Z to give me the shape I'm looking for. I'm going rough and I'm going fast. I'm just trying to get the general idea, get things lined up. I realize I have too many edges in there, so I just got rid of some of them. And then I hit poke faces here to give me just a single face coming out. Extrude those in, line this up with the other windows. And now those are all of my sort of major elements with some tweaks to be had. What's nice about this is I can pretty much, let's see, I knock this in here and I push it just a little bit in. So you can see I just get a sense of just like a little bit of a crack in there. And that's going to help collect a little shadow, which is going to make it look more like a doorway. So you can see now I have all the pieces that I need. I need to start thinking now about my pivots or my origins. So I turn on increment and snap to grid, control period, and I'm just trying to get everything onto grid snaps as much as possible. And sometimes I play with this a little bit. I think about where should this snap? What's the easiest way? I played with a couple versions, a couple different directions for snapping this into place. In this case, like I said, my mistake here was putting my, and I had to go back and fix it later, putting my empty in not on the grid. Everything needs to stay on the grid as much as possible. So now I got one whole wall and I've got all my corner pieces. And from here, I start just turning the corner. What you would want to do at this stage, I'm just going through and I end up repeating a lot of what I've done already, turning the corner. What you'd want to do with this is take any of your instanced objects and make them single user. Again, if you have search spacebar on, you just select them and set single user. And then you have your pieces, and I would think it would be a good time to start naming corner this, cornice A or cornice B, window unit A, window B, all of those things together. But you see with this, I have now a modular set that I can make an entire block of different buildings or even mix and match kits together and create, like from this distance, what you're seeing is quite a lot of detail. And in the next series of videos where I show you how to use textures, it's gonna really fill in a lot of these details. So hopefully that was helpful. If you missed some of the detail or you felt like there was a step here you didn't really understand, go ahead and ask, post questions, and I'll be happy to fill you all in. See you in the next one.